All right, guys. So, number one, this is this is called Revelation Mania because I'm going to be tearing through pretty much chapters 12 through 17 of Revelation, and there is so much stuff to talk about here that I'm going to do an ultimate disservice to what's going on in the book of Revelation. I'm just trying to hit some highlights. And even touch upon some stuff that I think you might have heard of before so you can see the origin of it. But I'm going to be talking pretty fast and going to be going over a lot of information, so feel free to leave comments or questions below the video because there's so much I'm going to be covering. I'm going to be skipping a lot, and it's going to be a bummer that I can't talk about it in a lot of detail, but what are you going to do? We don't get to meet as a class, and I'm not going to make a video that's 3 hours long. That's not going to be good for anybody. All right, so I'm kind of starting off in just going to hit some kind of random visions that John has, but things that I think are important. I'm going to start in Revelation 12 at the very beginning. We have these figures called the woman and the dragon. They're very important. Let me read to you the verses and then tell you about what they mean. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. And I used to always think people would be confused what diadems are. They're like crowns. But then I found out it's something in Harry Potter, and everybody knows it because they know stuff from Harry Potter. So who's the dragon? Who's the woman? Well, a lot of people see, hey, a woman that's pregnant and the baby she's going to have is really important. And the dragon, who, I'll spoiler alert it here, is actually the devil. It identifies him later in the chapter as being the devil. If the devil's chasing this woman, it's going to give a birth to a baby that's going to save the world. The baby must be Jesus, so that means the woman must be Mary. Well, as far as scholarly opinion, you're half right. They do think the baby is Jesus, but they think the woman represents Israel itself. That's why you have the 12 stars. If you remember back to my Bible intro, 12 is the number of the tribes of Israel, the number of sons that the man Israel, first named Jacob, had. And so they think this is the devil attacking the people of Israel, God's followers, because out of Israel will come the Savior of all mankind, Jesus. So that the dragon tries to chase this woman in John's vision, but she escapes, and the dragon's unable to get her. And then we have another vision he sees about the beast. Let me read it for you. Revelation 13, chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. And the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? Well, couple things going on here. You're probably going like, what the heck is John smoking? And what's all these crazy combination of animals and weird horns on everything? Well, there's a couple things that we have to understand. First of all, this isn't as crazy as it seems if we have a couple things in our minds when we read this. First, I'm going to take a little detour and show you this. You might say, what's going on, Mr. Piorik? Well, this is a political cartoon. We've seen a lot of political cartoons in our lives, and sometimes we even understand them. I'm going to give you a moment to look at this picture and try to describe in your head what you're seeing without any interpretation. So don't say what it means, just describe the picture. Ways that I've had students describe it before would be something like this: a group of zombie donkeys yelling the word spend approach a screaming woman. Now, if I just wrote that to you, you'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. But when you look at it, a lot of you probably do know what this is supposed to mean. Number one, we know that the donkeys are often seen as symbols of the Democrat Party. So these are the Democrats, and we know often that there are things that are, or one thing that is criticized about Democrats is that they spend too much. So all of a sudden, it says Night of the Living Dead. They're saying something about these Democrats are going to spend too much and they're dangerous. So we start getting the message, even though it's a bizarre image, if we don't know any of the things it means. Like, consider if you didn't know that donkeys represented Democrats. All of a sudden, this would make a lot less sense. Here's another one. If you were to describe it without meaning, you might say, 2 donkeys and an elephant are on a buoy at sea, while a man with big ears sinks in a boat. Well, if you know what it means, you see that Congress is written on here. We know that there are Democrats symbolized by donkeys, and the elephant symbolizes the Republicans. And this is Obama over here, and somehow his refugee policy is sinking, and everybody else has abandoned ship, and it's making a political point. If we look at this old one, Teddy Roosevelt, you could describe it as a giant man in a throne sits with a huge club. Upon his head is a diadem or a crown with the words unwritten constitution upon them. And he is wiping his feet upon a rug that says U.S. Constitution. And from his hands are leashes upon many miniature men that look like soldiers marching off to war. If I describe that all to you, you would say, what the heck are you talking about? But we know that it's some political statement being made about Roosevelt and his big stick policy, and that he's trampling on the Constitution by sending people to war, or something like that. We understand the message because we understand what all these different symbols mean. So the people hearing about this beast that come from the sea won't be as confused as we are. And here's one reason. They will have read the book of Daniel from the Old Testament, an earlier apocalyptic work. Let's read this real quick. This is from Daniel chapter 7. He's having an apocalyptic vision. Notice how it's written similarly with symbols. This shows you that what John is doing in Revelation is in the same genre as what Daniel is doing here. So it says, Daniel said, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea, just like our beast from Revelation. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its flesh. It was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled under feet whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. Now, if we have all these leopard, lion, bird beasts with all these horns, we start going, hey, this sounds a lot like this beast from the sea, which also had 10 horns. That Daniel had prophesied about back in the day in the book of Daniel. So what John is doing isn't giving his audience some undecipherable image. He is specifically saying, hey, the beasts that were prophesied in Daniel are happening now. And the way that the book of Daniel was originally interpreted was that each of these beasts represented some oppressive empire. One would come up, then be defeated, then another, and finally there would be a big one with 10 horns. And what John in Revelation is saying is that it's here, what Daniel had prophesied is here, and this is this new oppressive empire. And who is it? Well, if you know how John feels about empires, you know there's one he hates, and it's Rome. So he is saying Rome is the beast foretold by Daniel that we're living through now. And now the people reading this would understand that message. Then we have a second beast come. And it says, then I saw, oh, by the way, here's the deal. What this means is that all these crazy images of this beast seem like nonsense to us, but we got to think similarly to how these political cartoons would be nonsense without all the things that you understood they meant. They would seem like nonsense too. They're bizarre, crazy images that don't make any sense unless you know what the symbols are. And they would know what the symbols meant because they had read the book of Daniel, and they know that they're making connections. All right, now let's talk about the beast from the land. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. I won't go into what all of that means, but this beast that represents the Roman Empire, most people think, this second beast is some servant that promotes the evil empire. It has actually sometimes been called, and you've probably heard this term, the Antichrist. The word the Antichrist never shows up in the book of Revelation. It shows up in other places in the Bible, and it's used differently. Usually to talk about, it's actually just in the book of 1 John, talking about people that don't believe in the divine nature of Christ. But there was a theologian back in the day that took this second beast, the beast from the land, from Revelation, combined it with a couple other figures from the Bible and called them all the Antichrist. So that's where we get that from. Interesting? Maybe. The Antichrist has a number, and you've probably heard of it. It's 666. And this is this number, if you've heard of it, comes from Revelation 13, verse 18. It says that everybody has to have the number of the beast on them, and it says the number of the beast is the number of a man, and his number is 666. I've read a couple theologians about this, or biblical scholars, and they think that 666 numerologically somehow can be attributed to the letters in the name of the Emperor Nero. They explain it, but I don't understand it. But they're pretty sure that's what it means, so that John would be criticizing Emperor Nero, who was either the emperor at the time or recently was, and he's using this number to say that. It's not some magic number of the devil as much as a numerological way to talk about Nero. Oh man, there's so much in this reading. I'm just going to keep going. Then we have 7 bowls. Do you remember the 7 seals where all those bad things happened? And then the 7th seal opened the 7 trumpets. And then all the bad things happened with the 7 trumpets, like the mountains being thrown into the sea and locusts that ended up being helicopters or whatever. Well, now you have the 7 bowls. I'm not going to go into them because I've had enough going over 7 bad things that happen. It's complicated. But here's a picture of 7 angels pouring out 7 bowls that are going to be the wraths of God. During one of the 7 bowls, the bowl is poured out. Then all the armies of the earth gather together to prepare for battle in a place that is called Armageddon. This is a battle site at the end of the world. And I include it here because I'm sure you've heard that title before. It was the title of a 1990s movie where Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck blew up an asteroid that was going to hit the Earth. Spoiler alert. And it's always referenced whenever someone's talking about some horrible world-ending war. Some people just almost use it as a term for the apocalypse itself, the end of the world, Armageddon. Here's a picture of George W. Bush. I used to see this all around LA back when he was president, plastered up on places and saying, that his policies and foreign policy, and what he was doing was going to cause some huge, horrible war, so they used the term Armageddon. All right, let's finish off by talking about the great prostitute. All right, so the seven bowls pretty much just tear apart the world, which is the Roman Empire to a certain degree. And then finally, we see this image of this great prostitute. Let me tell you what John writes about it. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." And he carried me away and in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw the woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. You probably remember this beast. This is the Roman Empire, the devil, the great prostitute's another symbol of Rome that has become rich and powerful and drunk off of the blood and oppression of the Christians. We do have that talked about here. So the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery: Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. So John's making a point here that Rome is like this horrible woman that's all decked out in riches. She seems wealthy, she seems impressive, but actually she's just an oppressive, horrible power. And he names her Babylon. Now, if we know our biblical history, Babylon is one of the countries that originally conquered Israel and put them into captivity. So we have that thing going where they're saying the prostitute is Rome, and Rome, just like Babylon, is an oppressive power that is seems rich and powerful, but is actually just terrorizing and killing God's people. And if you're going like, Mr. Bjork, how do you know it's Rome? You think everything's Rome. Well, John gives us a little clue. And this is all the biblical interpreters see this as pretty obvious. He says, this calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. He talks about this woman, the prostitute, being seated on 7 mountains. This is him making fun of Roma, the goddess of Rome, who represents Rome herself, because Rome has 7 hills. This is a coin, an ancient Roman coin, that shows Roma, the goddess of Rome, who represents Rome, leisurely laying back upon these 7 mountains. And this great prostitute is seated upon 7 hills or 7 mountains of Rome. Pretty much saying, your Roma, your god of Rome, is just this horrible person that's drinking the blood of the Christians, and the empire itself is nothing but a beast and messenger of the devil. And John says, you're going down. And she does go down. One of the final chapters you read was the destruction of Babylon and everybody that's associated with her. So it's the final defeat of the evil Roman Empire by God. And then when we have our Zoom meeting on Thursday and Friday, we'll talk about the final chapters of Revelation where God is victorious and he ushers in a new world after this evil one has been destroyed. Whew! Hey, if you guys watch this whole thing, thank you. You're awesome. Go ahead and leave a comment or a question, and I hope you're doing well. All right.